Thanks for joining us. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. We begin with the UN's revelation of a mass grave found in Sudan's West Darfur region, following credible information that they were victims of attacks by members of the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. The RSF has denied any involvement in the deaths and of the mass grave, saying it was not party to the conflict in West Darfur. Bloodshed has escalated in recent weeks in Sudan as fighting between rival military factions erupted in April. It has brought the country to the brink of another civil war. Local people were forced to dispose of the bodies, including those of women and children, in the shallow grave in an open area near the city between June 20th and 21st. Some had also died from untreated injuries.
The bodies of at least 87 ethnic Masalit and others allegedly killed last month by Rapid Support Forces and their allied militia in West Darfur have been buried in a mass grave outside the region's capital of Al Janina on the orders of the Rapid Support Forces. Local people were forced to dispose of the bodies in a mass grave, denying those killed a decent burial in one of the city's cemeteries. At least 37 bodies were buried on the 20th of June in a 1-meter deep mass grave. Another 50 bodies were buried on the same site the next day, including bodies of 7 women and 7 children. We're calling on the RSF and other parties to the conflict to allow prompt searches for the dead, their collection and evacuation without distinction based on ethnic background, as they are obliged to do under international law. Witnesses said that local mediation efforts for access to the burial of the dead have generally taken long, leaving many bodies lying on the streets for days on end. One family told us it had to wait 13 days before being allowed to collect the body of a family member, a Masalit dignitary. RSF's leadership and all parties to the conflict must ensure that the dead are properly handled and their dignity protected. Relief workers must be able to record all available information, including taking proper photos of the bodies and identifying the location of the graves. We call on the RSF leadership to immediately and unequivocally condemn and stop the killing of people and to end violence and hate speech against people on the basis of their ethnicity.
In the meantime, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is presiding over another major meeting aimed at quelling the war in Sudan and allow humanitarian aid into key areas. During the meeting holding in Cairo, the Egyptian capital, President al-Sisi told the gathering, quote, firstly, calling on the warring factions to cease escalation and to start without further ado on serious negotiations that aim at reaching an immediate and sustainable ceasefire. Secondly, calling on all Sudanese parties to facilitate the passage of humanitarian aid, to provide safe passage to deliver this aid to the areas most in need inside Sudan, and to establish a mechanism to provide needed protection to the humanitarian aid convoys and the staff of the international relief agencies to help them do their jobs. The summit is being attended by leaders from neighboring South Sudan, Chad, and the Central African Republic. And now to the weather. For days now, we have been monitoring the devastation of floods in India. Torrential rains have left parts of the capital, New Delhi, heavily flooded amid warnings there would be water rationing after the Yamuna River broke its banks. Monsoon season began June the 1st, and since then, Delhi has recorded 113% above average rainfall. The rains in the hilly states to the north have fed the river's floodwaters. Video footage showed submerged roads on the downtown area where government and private companies' offices are located, with water halfway up the sides of parked cars. Other images showed the road by the city's historical Red Fort underwater. The city of 20 million people has ordered the closure of all schools, colleges, universities until Sunday and stopped non-essential government staff from coming to office. Elsewhere, floods have also been wreaking havoc in parts of northern China, where heavy rains have lashed for weeks now. Authorities have carried out evacuations in multiple provinces as roads have been engulfed by the flooding. Footage provided by state television CCTV showed severe flooding in parts of Yancheng City, Shanxi Province. Neighboring Shanxi province evacuated more than 1,200 people. The country has increased warnings of extreme weather due to climate change. So far, more than 40,000 people have been evacuated because of the floods. Well, Europe, on the other hand, is dealing with a heat wave. Tourists in Rome, Italy, had to employ strategies to cope with the rising temperatures today. And these included drinking water, soft drinks, use fans or sought shelter in the shade as they queued up at tourist sites. Meteorologists expect the current heat wave to last at least 1 week, reaching temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius from Sunday.
Today it's still okay because we're a little bit out of the sun. But we were yesterday at the Colosseum and there it was like 38 degrees. So it was suffering 1 hour in the heat. So we had to change time to time in the queue to have a chance against the heat.
Oh, there wasn't much difference in Greece as thousands of tourists braved the rising temperatures in Athens to see the country's most famous landmark, the Acropolis. Medical workers were nearby treating visitors for various conditions. So were ambulances assisting crowds, while Hellenic Cross workers set up mobile units at the site to hand out bottles of water and guidance pamphlets. Now, health workers said they had treated at least 20 people for fainting spells, dizziness and also nausea.
They were nauseous, they are dizzy, they don't feel well, they want somewhere to sit, and they have to immediately to take them out of sun, immediately. And of course, in an air conditioning place, if it's possible. That's why, with the leaflets, we try to inform them where in the municipality of Athens there are places with air condition in order to go inside. They need to see the Acropolis today because they leave tomorrow or after tomorrow. They don't have time in Greece. We try to inform them not to come today, but if they leave and they have a very long travel, they have to do it today because Acropolis you will see once in a lifetime. So they want to see that.
It's really hard. I've got asthma, so this heat is terrible. For it. We were in Florence, Rome, and had to actually have the paramedics called because the heat was so bad. So it's pretty hard, but it's awesome that the Red Cross is here. I think that's fabulous. I think it's a great idea. But it's pretty brutal.
No, I'm used to this heat, so I didn't really have a choice, but I'm just trying to cool off as I can. So.
Well, I'm from Canada, so I'm used to cold, so I don't mind the heat at all. I take advantage of this. We have a super short summer, so as long as I can be in the sun, I'm happy. I don't care what the weather is. We put on 60 SPF, so we're good. We have our water, no complaints.
Well, what would be the impact of the heat wave across Europe? Climate scientist and a professor at a university in the UK, Hannah Cloak, says it's the risk it poses to human life. In an interview, she says the heat wave is getting worse. One way to stop the temperatures rising is to immediately stop pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to reduce the number of deaths as a result of the heat wave.
We saw a serious heat wave last summer. We saw a serious heat wave previous to that as well, but it's getting worse and worse. And we are locked into some of these changes. Certainly, we should immediately stop pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere because that is going to cause even more problems in the future. But we must realise we're locked into some of these changes now, and we will continue to see records broken. These temperatures are very high. It does cause danger to life, so we're very worried that a number of people will die in this heat wave. When we saw the heat wave last summer in 2022, it's estimated that over 60,000 people died in that heat wave across Europe. Heat is a silent killer. So this is the main concern, that people's lives are at risk. This heat wave has happened because we've had hot air come up from the Sahara. And then this air mass, this high pressure system has just sat across parts of Europe, particularly the hottest bit sitting across Italy. So we've had days of really high temperatures and also nights of really high temperatures too. And it's not just the land temperature that's hot, it's also, there's a marine heat wave, so the oceans are also warm as well. So there's no cooling effect at the coast.
Well, let's bring in another expert, environmentalist Olumide Dowu, joins us now here virtually in Lagos. Olumide, it's good to see you. What's your take? We're seeing so many temperatures different extremes. I mean, if not the rising temperatures, heat wave in Europe, we're seeing floods in Asia. What do you make of what's going on?
Yeah, thank you very much. The other guests have actually said some key points, but I will also mention that the heat wave that is happening in Europe presently, from my own understanding and reading, it has actually the combination of meteorological factors. And even these are something that is including the high pressure system, the warm air masses, and even the blocking patterns in the atmosphere. So these are the key issue that I see that is actually causing a lot of problem. And the important thing now is that it is important to note that the specific causes and intensity of heat wave can be varied depending on the various factors that we see, such as location, time in the year, and even the local climate characteristics. And that is why we need to start looking at what are the measures, what are the natural meteorological factors that we can see or we can do, or the role the heat wave formation is causing the environment. So it's very important that we start looking at those urgent action and immediate action that can actually, as I'm mentioning, the blocking pattern is something that this pattern can actually also influence duration and extent of the heat wave, which is trapping warm air and even prolonging the hot and the dry conditions. So it's very, very key that we start looking at some short and long-term solution to this problem of heat wave. And I know, like I said, by location, the time in the year, we need to be get ready for this kind of period because the world is getting hotter, and we need to start looking at the period this is happening and the location is going to happen so that every one of us can look at solution towards it.
And on Olumide, they've said that, the heat wave is some sort of silent killer, but then there's also floods we're seeing in countries in Asia. What is happening there?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of devastating environmental issues, and climate change has led to more of this extreme weather pattern. And, there's no continent that is left behind, including the heavier rainfall and even increased flooding in the part of Asia that we see now. And one thing I would say is that it's very, very crucial that we look at the flood waters, because this has already caused a widespread disruption in the system. And the only thing we start seeing is this displacement of communities, damaging a lot of infrastructure, and even disrupting the economy. And it's very, very important that it also poses a significant risk to human health, and even the flood water can contaminate the water the people drink and the sources, increase the spread of waterborne diseases. And it's very crucial for the continent, the Asia continent, to start looking at how to adopt mitigation and adaptation strategy so that they can be able to address the flood risk that they are facing presently. And this action can include implementation of sustainable land and water management practices, because that is the only solution that is available for them to start looking at, and even constructing flood defense, improving early warning systems, providing resilience infrastructure development, even in the flood-prone areas that we can see across the continent that they find us. And let me say, by additionally, it's also very important that they reduce the greenhouse gas emission through international collaboration, which is vital in the tackling the root of climate change. I will end by saying climate change is a time bomb. And if we don't take urgent action, it's going to affect a lot of communities, even not only in the Asia continent, but other parts of the continent across the world.
Indeed, because even here in Nigeria, NIMET has warned that, some states will experience flooding. We've heard of 11 days or 15 days of constant rainfall, and, some communities, estates, are also suffering this. But would you say that things have worsened over the years and, we're not doing as much to tackle this? What do you think we can do in the meantime to sort of mitigate the impact of, the weather, the environment and climate change?
Thank you very much. Every year we talk about flooding in Nigeria, which is a significant problem, especially during rainy season. And, some key action that we need to do to address this problem is not only for the government, but the citizens also need to take action. One, we need to start looking at how we can improve our drainage system. That is the only thing that can help us to enhance the drainage infrastructure that we have. and to also involve constructing proper drainage network is very, very key. Then we also need to start looking at flood plan management. Alignment is there to also, create this awareness for people so that we have a proper planning and a land use management that can help us to enforce building codes and standard, across all communities for flood resilience. We need to start looking at how we can implement early warning system. Is a very, very crucial one. The utilization of weather monitoring technology, how much of these NIMET is putting in place is very, very key, so that we can start looking at how we disseminate alerts, information, various communication channels to educate people to plan on how to respond to the issue of flooding. Then we need to look at our reforestation and ecosystem prevention, preservation. They are also very key in this system. So the risk we are seeing now can cause the damage for many years. So public awareness and education is key so that we can create an atmosphere that is going to be, and you also mentioned that people say climate change. Yes, climate change adaptation. This is taking long-term issue, and we need to look at adaptation measure so that all of us as a citizens, as a people, can address the root causes of flooding. And this can only help us to reduce our carbon emission, also to promote what we call the sustainable practices. And it is important for us to also note that the flooding in Nigeria requires a comprehensive and a multi-sector approach so that it can help us to improve, it can help us to involve government, local communities, stakeholders, and even the experts that can help us to know what to do at the right time. So I will say that collaboration is key. Effort or different efforts in different levels is vital for us to actually achieve a sustainable flood management in Nigeria, so that everybody can take responsibility, not saying government every time, but putting measures and making sure that we take local actions to solve the flooding problem in Nigeria.
But maybe some would say that the problem is that there are still some doubting Thomases when it comes to climate change, some who do not believe that there's such a thing as that. Do you think that that has been also largely a big problem in this fight to sort of correcting some of these things that you've said, would help, or perhaps it's just, there's not enough education?
Yeah, I think by now, for what people have been seeing from left and right happening in the country, even across every continent, people should understand that climate change is real. Anybody that is still looking at the issue of climate change as something that is not important, then that person doesn't really understand the impact that has been causing to them. And a lot of people don't know that some things that happen to us individually is those things that are things that we can say it is climate change. And it is important to also note that the minority of people that are talking about climate denial or looking at climate change as just only scientific problem, there are people that are not really seeing the conversation that we are seeing presently across what everybody is talking. So there are different kind of denial. We have political denials when it comes to climate action. We have people that they have been getting misinformed because of the things they see. And we have some people that misunderstanding, misinformation, political ideology is making them to think that climate change is not real. And I can say, as long as you are a victim of heat waves, flooding, desert encroachment, desertification, oil and gas issue, gas flaring, then that means that climate change is real. And that is why when we face economic problem, is like an economic interest. If you are facing that kind of issue, we are facing a down, that's a climate change issue that we are looking at. So for me, I think we need to start looking at more critical awareness through different channels. Even the government, the National Orientation Agency, need to also put more attention into this so that the fear of these consequences, fear of these things that we see, that people think the climate is not real, will not happen again. And everybody will start acknowledging how they need to take responsibility, how they need to take part in taking action, and the major problem we are facing can be solved collaboratively and not only one person solving it.
And finally, Olumide, earlier in the week, it snowed in Johannesburg. While perhaps, it was unusual, it's not the first time. I believe a decade ago it snowed there as well. And we've also seen that in Egypt, Alexandria, the city, in 2013. Should we expect more unusual weather events? And what do you think Nigeria should expect?
Yeah, like NIMET have told us, right, that we should expect a lot of, weather change. The change in weather comes to flooding, heat, and we are a little bit in the rainy season now. And the only thing we need to start looking at is real. They've given us some sort of information. So for us as citizens, as the people, we need to start looking at what kind of measure we need to take. Because we keep seeing issues of flooding every time we have rainy season. So it's sending us a signal that this will not even go away for some time unless there's a measure that we put in place. Even though we are putting those measures in place, we should make sure that we have maintenance structure that can help us to drive this consequence or drive this issue out of our community. So there's emergency response need to be put in place so that everybody in Nigeria will understand that there is issue of flooding, there is issue of desert encroachment, desertification, and we should start getting to familiarize ourselves with solution that is going to last for long. Because when we come with solutions that is just for that period of time, then it affects us to start looking at spending more money, spending more, going to different technologies that will not solve the problem. So it is high time, as we know that they've given us information that there's going to be a lot of, casualty when it comes to flooding. There's going to be drainage systems going to be blocked. So every one of us as citizens need to start looking at what are the rapid response, what are the damages going to cost to us, and how can we recover from this? Then how can we start looking at relief and humanitarian assistance that can support us during this period of flooding so that every one of us will be left behind? Thank you.
We always appreciate your time. Olumide Idowu, environmentalist. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Well, we're not done with the weather just yet. We've been reporting floods in Vermont and parts of New York over the past few days. But for places like Las Vegas, San Antonio areas, which experienced an intense heat wave on Wednesday, temperatures continue to rise there, as well as the states of Nevada and Texas. A prolonged heat wave blanketed a swath of the U.S. stretching from California to South Florida on Wednesday, with forecasters expecting temperatures that could shatter records in parts of the Southwest in coming days. The National Weather Service issued excessive heat advisories, watches and warnings for areas where about 100 million Americans live. The sweltering conditions are expected to worsen over the weekend and continue into the new week. In the meantime, the biggest worry for those in Chicago has been tornadoes and thunderstorms, which battered greater Chicago area on Wednesday, forcing the O'Hare and Midway airports to halt all air traffic. At least 8 tornadoes touched down in 4 counties, northeastern Illinois, including 4 in Cook County, home to Chicago. The storms left tree roof damage in several residential areas, including in towns of Huntley and Hodgkins. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration reported all departures of commercial flights into O'Hare and Midway were grounded, and outgoing flights from the 2 airports were delayed. Thankfully, there were no reports of serious injuries. Well, more about the U.S. weather. Meteorologists have been watching their monitors more closely because of the multiple heat records across the country. Thermometers read 100 Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius at midday in Phoenix, but the day's high temperatures could reach above 43 degrees Celsius for the 13th successive day. The forecast puts the city's daily highs above 110 Fahrenheit at least through next Wednesday, which would shatter the record of 18 days above that mark set in June 1974. Warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Phoenix, Tom Friday's records could be broken as early as next week.
For the excessive heat, it's mainly whenever we deal with temperatures that are well above normal for the time of year. So For us, normal in Phoenix is actually right around 107. So we are at our hottest point of the year. So abnormal is getting well above 110 in the afternoon, as well as dealing with low temperatures that are getting into the upper 80s and 90s. And that correlates to what we use as heat risk. Once we start to see the reds and the purples, that's when we start to issue our excessive heat watches and warnings. And in the current heat wave, we do have a lot of major and extreme heat risk. So that's one of the reasons why we have that issued. It's one of the main tools that we use for the issuing process.
The stretch of consecutive days of 110 degrees plus, specifically for Phoenix, we're at 12 days currently for those consecutive days. The record is actually 18 days. So if we continue with this, these extreme afternoon temperatures, we would be breaking that record early next week. So as this heat builds all across the Southwest U.S., we're looking at, potential daily records for high temperatures being broken from California to the west through Arizona, all the way into West Texas. So it's a really significant expansion of the heat, and daily records could be broken. And it looks like the peak of the heat looks to be coming in Friday through next Monday, and that's when a lot of records will be in jeopardy.
Welcome back. The BBC says it has dug up evidence Greek Coast Guards pressed migrants on board a sinking boat to identify the 9 Egyptians on board with them as human traffickers. A new video of the overcrowded boat foundering as at sea also challenges the Greek Coast Guard's account. It was taken when the boat was set to be on a steady course. BBC Verify has confirmed the footage was filmed when the Coast Guard claimed the boat was not in need of rescue and was in fact filmed by the Coast Guard itself. The BBC has also confirmed that the larger vessel in the background is the oil tanker Faithful Warrior, which had been asked to give supplies to the migrant boat. But 2 survivors of the disaster say migrants were silenced and intimidated by Greek authorities after suggesting the Coast Guards may have been to blame for the tragedy. And the government of Seychelles has responded to the issue of visa ban on Nigerian passport holders. In an article posted on the government news agency website, the Vice President Ahmed Afif explained that Nigerians with diplomatic passports, valid work or resident permits issued by the island nation will be allowed to enter. He says for the others, the government will keep its eyes open and the Seychelles electronic border system will analyze much more to find out what reasons they are coming. Example is someone who's coming for a holiday for only 1 day. We have to ask questions because it is strange, and we have seen that happening. He says there were many instances where many Nigerians said they were coming for holidays, but only for 1 or 2 days, and that in the past year, especially in the past few months, the government has observed a tendency deemed dangerous for the border control and the economy due to criminal activities happening in the country. According to him, in the past 2 weeks, 13 people coming from Nigeria have been arrested when entering Seychelles because they were carrying drugs into the country. He also highlighted the issue of some Nigerians using false credit cards at tourist establishments. There had been an outcry earlier in the week about Nigerian passport holders being banned from receiving visas from the government of Seychelles for holiday purposes. Vice President of AFIF said it arose due to lack of communication on the matter. Meanwhile, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism of Seychelles, Sylvestre Ragonde, is set to meet with the Nigerian ambassador for Seychelles to discuss the matter. Germany has published its long-awaited China strategy, which took stock of an increasingly assertive Beijing and outlined possible responses, such as outbound investment controls and cutting-edge technology with military use. The 64-page document comes amid a broader push in the West to reduce strategic dependencies on China, which policymakers have labeled de-risking amid concerns about Beijing increasingly seeking to assert its hegemony in the Indo-Pacific. The strategy was agreed by the cabinet after months of wrangling within Chancellor Olaf Scholz's three-way coalition. The Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, presented the strategy at the Berlin-based think tank, Mercator Institute for China Studies, after the cabinet meeting. She says, "We do not want to decouple ourselves from China, but to mitigate risks as much as possible," explaining that the recent past had shown how vulnerable unilateral dependencies make us. On the economy, the strategy outlined proposals to reduce critical dependencies on China in line with what has previously been agreed by the European Union. China became Germany's single biggest trade partner in 2016. And the US President Joe Biden today held talks with Nordic leaders at Finland's presidential palace, visiting NATO's newest member directly after knocking Russian President Vladimir Putin at a summit a day earlier. Mr. Biden traveled to Finland, which shares a border with Russia, straight from this week's NATO talks in Vilnius, Lithuania, to participate in a US Nordic summit with the leaders of Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland and Norway. Finland's decision to join NATO broke with 7 decades of military non-alignment and roughly doubled the length of the border NATO shares with Russia.
We just finished a historic NATO summit, and I think it was historic, where we welcomed Finland's accession to NATO and reached an agreement to move forward on Sweden's membership in NATO. And it was a reminder that the nations around the table are not only share common history, but we share common challenges. And I would add, presumptuously, common values. And, the vision for the world that we all share, and I think it's a very similar vision, is one that's more free, more secure, and opportunities made available for all.
Now you have become a member, and we are so happy that we will soon be able to welcome Sweden as well. And of course, this means something for the Nordic region, because we have been together in so many areas through the years, but we have never been together in NATO before. So this also brings us some possibilities and opportunities in the Nordic region.
Elsewhere, British Foreign Minister James Cleverly has stressed his support for ASEAN multilateralism during a conference with Brunei's Second Minister to Foreign Affairs, Ewan Yusof. The meeting was held on the sidelines of the Southeast Asian-led summit in Indonesia, which takes place annually and is being attended by envoys from major partners, including the US, Russia, Australia, Japan and India. The gathering of ASEAN comes as doubts mount over the credibility and unity of the bloc in dealing with the region's thorniest challenges. ASEAN will also hold the East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum on Friday, with US Secretary of State and Russia's Foreign Minister both slated to attend.
We also look forward to working closely with the UK to implement the ASEAN-UK Plan of Action, and we welcome the UK's multi-year flagship development programs in 5 areas, namely women and girls education, economic integration, women, peace and security, health systems, and climate transition.
First of all, I am here to reconfirm our commitment and to underline the UK's appreciation of ASEAN's central role in promoting regional peace, prosperity, and security. And this year, we are launching 5 new programs. We care deeply about multilateralism, and we are keen to work with ASEAN partners to advance the goals that we all share. Next week, for example, I will chair the first ever UN Security Council discussion on artificial intelligence in the run-up to our Prime Minister's AI Safety Summit later on this year.
Meanwhile, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said the government's new pay offer for public sector workers would cost billions of pounds, which had not been budgeted for and would largely have to be found from elsewhere in the government budget. Mr. Sunak said the government would not borrow to fund the higher pay or raise taxes on citizens, though a levy paid by many recent immigrants would rise. He called for an end to strikes affecting schools and the health service, and shortly after his statements, the teaching trade union said that strike action would be called off. The British Prime Minister has accepted an independent pay review body's recommendation for a 6.5% pay increase.
I can confirm today that we are accepting the headline recommendations of the pay review bodies in full. But we will not fund them by borrowing more or increasing your taxes. It would not be right to increase taxes on everyone to pay some people more, particularly when household budgets are so tight. Neither would it be right to pay for them by higher borrowing, because higher borrowing simply makes inflation worse. Instead, because we only have a fixed pot of money to spend from, that means government departments have had to find savings and efficiencies elsewhere. Having honoured the independent pay review process, I urge all union leaders to accept these pay offers and call off their strikes. Today's offer is final. There will be no more talks on pay. We will not negotiate again on this year's settlements, and no amount of strikes will change our decision. Instead, the settlement we've reached today gives us a fair way to end the strikes, a fair deal for workers and a fair deal for the British taxpayer.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Final on the programme, this one's for all the sweet tooth out there. A digital bakery in Los Angeles is creating intricate candy treats using a first-of-its-kind 3D food printer that uses sugar to craft elaborate designs at scale. Sugar Lab co-founder Cale von Helsen's journey into the world of culinary sugar creations began when he was a student at the Southern California Institute of Architecture. He bought a traditional 3D printer and began tinkering around with it and experimenting with ingredients, as well as candies in the shape of everything from cartoon characters to superheroes to wizards. Halson and his crew also print edible cake toppers, drink additives, sugar bites, often using dehydrated fruits for flavor, and some of the shapes are designed to be filled with chocolate. On the savory side, the team also produces kimchi soup drops.
I think that 3D printing has the potential to really remake almost every industry that we can imagine, and food is one of them. But food is so precious to us. We know that, I mean, you can think of food products that we have in our home like bread. Something like that has been just crafted over thousands of years to be, and using microbiology to make just a perfectly crafted piece of food that we all know and expect what it will be like. But there are all these spaces where we accept artistry in food beyond the actual difficulty of the craft. So in dessert space is a really good example where the way something looks is so important to us. It opens up our mind, it makes us accepting and approachable. We're unlike a regular bakery in many ways, and we're like a bakery in plenty of ways. I think the way to explain it is that the 3D printer and 3D design are really important moments in crafting 3D printed food, but they're not the only stage. They're not the only thing that you do. It really takes working with a chef and having a goal, researching what ingredients you want, sourcing them, bringing them in-house, mixing them up, tasting them, before they even go into the 3D printer and understanding what you're working with. And then after the object is 3D printed, there are a million things that a chef can do with that object.
Well, perhaps the pudding is in the eating. Well, that's the world today. Many thanks for watching. I'm Melissa Walker. Bye for now.